Hey, it's Dr. G. And whether you've been a longtime listener or you're new to the podcast, welcome. Have you ever felt like you wanted to start over or reinvent your life? If so, I want to invite you to tell me all about it. I really need your advice. And to reward you for your time, I'm going to be choosing 9 listeners to join me on a free one-on-one relaunch game plan call. This call is designed to help you get clear on your specific goals so you can relaunch your life. To join in and be eligible for the free call, go to discover.drgordon.me. That's discover.drgordon.me and answer all the questions. I look forward to reading your responses and talking to you soon. Thanks for your help, and thanks for launching your life with me. Hi, this is the Launch Your Life podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Gordon. Today on the podcast, I'm talking about sundown towns, cultural and systemic racism, and Christmas traditions. As always, I welcome your feedback. Feel free to email me, drg@drgordon.me. And for the latest episodes, go to launchyourlifepodcast.com. If you like the podcast, please take a moment to give it a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts and share it widely with your friends. Last time I left you with causes of toxic shame, the stages of predation, generational trauma, family secrets, and a couple of entrepreneurial stories. Listen to or watch the previous episodes starting with 162 for the complete story. Now, there's no easy way to talk about racism. American history of slavery, Jim Crow, white supremacy veiled in religion, continued wrongful conviction due to race, and the genocide of the Native Americans is a dark stain we're never going to be able to remove. And these are just a few of the systemic atrocities perpetuated in the name of progress or religion. The native people of the Tri-Cities, confined to the reservation, legally fished for glinting salmon as they jumped the fish ladders and swam upstream to spawn in the cool, clear water of the Yakima River. Sometimes the native men, after catching the salmon, would walk our neighborhood selling the day's catch. But as I recall it, confined to the reservation, they couldn't live in our town or go to our schools. During the buildup to World War II, before the bombing of Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the defense industry created millions of new jobs, but not for African Americans. According to Britannica.com, A. Philip Randolph, head of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, actively fought for African American employment rights and social justice. Unfortunately, the politically powerful Southern Democrats lobbied to keep Jim Crow alive, and instead of defending civil rights, President Roosevelt focused on war mobilization efforts. So Randolph threatened to organize a large march on Washington, D.C., and rather than the embarrassment of 100,000 or more protesters crowding the mall, the president issued Executive Order 8802. Now, according to blackpast.org, President Roosevelt issued Executive Order 8802 on June 24, 1941. This prohibited racial discrimination in the employment of workers in defense industries or government because of race, creed, color, or national origin. Therefore, any private firm working on a federal contract couldn't racially discriminate when hiring. The federal government required DuPont to employ blacks for no more than 10 to 20% of the total Hanford construction workforce. The government imposed the cap at 20% because it believed white workers would protest if black employees accounted for more than that. Of course, like much governmental policy, there was no evidence to support this belief. And the executive order did not prohibit segregation in living quarters. The black workers at Hanford lived in segregated barracks on the Hanford site or an intentionally segregated area of East Pasco. Surprisingly, everyone received equal pay for equal work, regardless of skin color. But those African Americans who relocated from the South to work on the Hanford project and expected to escape violence were sorely disappointed. When the Hanford construction concluded, most African American workers moved away, but about 1,000 families stayed in East Pasco. According to the Civil Rights and Labor History Consortium at the University of Washington, there is nothing subtle about the Tri-Cities' reputation for racism and segregation. For decades, Kennewick and Richland were sundown towns, banning black people after dark. African Americans were forced to live in East Pasco, and even after discrimination became illegal, segregation continued. It was not until the census of 2000 that residential patterns opened for African Americans. Pasco also became home to the rapidly expanding population of Latinos. It is only in the current century that Kennewick and Richland have begun to diversify. Blackpast.org states sundown towns are all white communities, neighborhoods, or counties that exclude blacks and other minorities through the use of discriminatory laws, harassment, and threats or use of violence. The name derives from the posted and verbal warnings issued to blacks that although they might be allowed to work or travel in a community during the daytime, they must leave by sundown. Now, although the term most often refers to the forced exclusion of blacks, the history of sundown towns also includes prohibitions against Jews, Native Americans, Chinese, Japanese, and other minority groups. The old green bridge connecting Pasco and Kennewick over the expanse of the Columbia River bore a sign with a racial slur telling blacks to be back in Pasco by sunset. A revealing article written by Afro's Fatima Ahmed and published shortly after the death of George Floyd on tumbleweird.org, June 9, 2020, recounts her high school teacher citing the words of the sign verbatim, racial epithet and all. The article goes on to reinforce how the systemic racism of the Tri-Cities hasn't changed. Racism and its cousin bigotry are taught. My parents told us Pasco was dangerous and all black people were criminals. They commonly used the N-word to describe people, nuts, and candy. Separation was good, and so was our white skin. Our white skin made us more entitled, smart, and generally better than others. They had all white friends, some of whom were lecherous old men who drooled at me during parties. And I think my parents believed they, and by extension their children, were better than the different others. So I absorbed this as the truth, and I knew nothing different. Of course, there is no difference between any of us, and even Paul, in his letter to the Galatians, considered the word of God by many Christians, says in chapter 3, verse 28, there is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. I don't know how religious leaders miss this. There is no biblical or scientific justification for racism of any kind. But white faces dominated in church, even at the highly attended and crowded holiday masses. And at the House of Many Horrors, it was festive at Christmas. Shortly after Thanksgiving, Dad would take my brothers to purchase the perfect Douglas fir to fit in the living room. They'd lug the tree through the front door, but it was always too tall, so Dad had to cut the stump again to make room for the tree topper. After securing the tree, our parents let us loose. All four of us decorated the tree. It was a mess, a free-for-all, without any structure. We strung the lights and placed ornaments wherever we could reach, most ending up on the lower branches. It was a ton of fun and a mess, but it was our mess. And once we finished with the ornaments, it was tinsel time. We grabbed handfuls of the stuff, threw it up in the air, and watched it rain down on the branches, sometimes in clumps. The neighborhood kids sometimes came to decorate with us because they weren't allowed to decorate their trees. My second oldest brother, Ken, created an extensive Christmas list yearly. And when I think of a child's Christmas list, it's a hastily written mess on a piece of scrap paper. But Ken's Christmas lists were epic feats of thought and OCD. They often consisted of more than 100 items, numbered and prioritized according to desire and need. He continued making the annual list until he died in 1996. And this habit didn't stop as we grew up. Ken simply sent his list to the entire family, and I always looked forward to it. On Christmas Eve, Mom wrangled everyone to midnight mass. And I don't understand why someone would take 4 young children anywhere together, let alone a church service in the middle of the night. Now, Mom's bribe to keep us quiet was the promise of opening one present when we returned from midnight mass. So I carefully considered every festive package with my name on it, wanting to pick a good one, but not the best one, fearing I'd ruin Christmas morning if I did. But underneath the tree was overflowing with presents every Christmas morning, and we never had a frenzy of opening all of our presents at once. Instead, Mom made us take turns and pay attention to whoever was opening. It was a controlled system, and this tradition is the only cooperative activity I really remember from my childhood. Everyone complied without a fight. I guess we all wanted our presents. However, after breakfast, we'd play with our new toys and fight amongst ourselves. We were competitive and sometimes jealous of each other's presents. Finally, when the noise became too much, Mom shooed us outside to sled or play in the snow. Now, in the 1970s, we had to entertain ourselves with snowball fights, snowmen or women, and snow forts. We were generally unfazed by the weather. One Christmas, the only present I wanted was a baby grow-a-tooth. It was the girl toy of the season, highly advertised, but released in limited quantity to raise the price. I was singularly obsessed with this doll, like I was obsessed with the gumball machine for my 5th birthday. And when it was my turn to open a present, my dream came true. It was a baby grow-a-tooth. I loved her and unabashedly showed her tooth-growing ability to my friends. And no one noticed she was black. I certainly didn't. You see, when my parents went to purchase the toy, only brown dollies were left on the shelf. And my mother was so worried I would reject the doll, but I didn't even notice. As I've said before, racism is a learned behavior. I wish I could say I didn't notice skin differences in school or absorb the belief we were better, smarter, or more entitled. It took years of exposure to other ways of thinking, understanding my parents taught me blatant racism, and my willingness to see others' viewpoints before I unlearned the systemic racism I absorbed through my childhood. I'm still a work in progress. And I want to show you the baby grow-a-tooth. I have it here in my computer. So that's the baby grow-a-tooth. That's what she looked like. Next time on the podcast, we'll move to the terrible teens, I think. And I'll see you then. If you like the episode, please subscribe so you won't miss any episodes. Share with your friends and on social. And please leave a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. If you really like it, please donate to my Venmo at Dr. Gordon, DrGordon, and help me with my market research. Please fill out the questionnaire at discover.drgordon.me. And to thank you for your time, I'll invite 10 people who complete the form to a free relaunch game plan call and help uncover what's keeping you from launching your life. I'll see you next time.